Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from Taiwan. I'm Chris Gorin. It's been 50 years since the end of the Vietnam War, and the country has become a hub for manufacturing, drawing billions of investment from countries like Taiwan and the US as they try to move supply chains out of China. But while the economy has opened up, the political system remains closed. Vietnam is still a one-party communist state where journalists face surveillance, censorship, and jail time for their reporting. It ranks among the world's worst countries for press freedom, 173rd out of 180, according to Reporters Without Borders. Today, we sit down with Trịnh Hữu Long, a Vietnamese journalist and democratic activist living in exile here in Taiwan. From a small office here at the National Zhengzhou University in Taipei, he runs a small independent media outlet, a legal advocacy group, and a small library of Vietnamese books banned by the communist regime. Long, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and how you came to be a journalist.
I was born in the northern part of Vietnam in 1986 and into a family in which my parents are communist members and working for the government for their whole life. I grew up in a rural area of Vietnam, and I went to law school in Hanoi. 3 years after I graduated, I participated in a protest movement that was the largest and the longest protest movement in Vietnam after the Vietnam War. Because of that, I was arrested and was detained for a few days.
And what was that protest movement?
It was on the surface, it was an anti-China protest, protesting China invading and attacking Vietnamese ships in the South China Sea. But underlying behind that movement is really a way to practice leveraging, using a patriotic movement to practice human rights. And here it's a right to demonstration, the right to free speech, right? And that was prohibited in Vietnam back in that time.
These anti-China protests in 2014, that was like a major turning point for you in your decision to become a journalist?
I became a journalist right after the 2011 protest movements. And I worked for the state media and I worked for the non-state media. And then 2013, I left the country, going into exile. And since 2013, I have been operating independent media outlets and working for various human rights organizations overseas. I spent 4 years in the Philippines, and then since 2016, I have moved to Taiwan, and I've lived here since.
In the end, as you've already said, you decided to come to Taiwan and make it your new home. I suppose you might have had quite a few choices of where to set up. What made you decide on Taipei?
Back in 2016, I was in the Philippines working for a human rights organization there. And I decided that by the end of the year, I would quit the organization to run my own independent media. And January 2016, I had an opportunity to come to Taiwan to observe the presidential election, where Taiwan won for the first time. I was there during her political rally the night before the election and her victory rally on the election day as well. I was part of a group of Vietnamese activists, and we were deeply moved and inspired by what we saw in Taiwan that day. We were all in tears in those political rallies, and everyone was thinking that this could be Vietnam in 30 years. And we certainly realized that Taiwan could be a very good model for Vietnam. And gradually, we determined that Taiwan is not only a good model, but the best model of democratization for Vietnam, simply because the two countries share the similar culture.
These days, you're running a nonprofit, the Legal Initiatives for Vietnam. Tell us about the work that you guys do.
We set up LIV in 2014 as a independent media organization. And what we do is to fight censorship in Vietnam. Given the fact that press freedom is non-existent in the country, we wanted to build an independent media movement, and not only independence, but also quality media, in order to convince the public and the government that independent journalism can be a good thing for society, can be a constructive contribution to the country, to the nation's building. So we run 2 digital magazines. One is Tuột Qua in Vietnamese, and one is the Vietnamese magazine in English. So we're trying to target both people inside the country and international audience, trying to explain the legal and political affairs in the country in a very easy to understand way. So people can understand the complex of politics and legal affairs, and trying to build up their political awareness.
One of the co-founders of your website is the activist Pham Duan Trang, who's now serving a 9-year sentence in Vietnam. Before we get into how that came about, tell us a little bit about how you two first started working together.
It was all started with the 2011 movement. This is such a consequential movement in Vietnam's history. I believe that if anyone wants to understand Vietnam's contemporary politics, they need to study this movement. 2011 protest movement that lasted for 3 months that summer, where a lot of activists suddenly found themselves standing in the same spots in the city, protesting against China. And we quickly became close friends, and we quickly formed civil society organizations and building up the movements even further. That was when I met with Duan Trang. She was a big name back then. She was such an inspiring journalist already because of her brave coverage of the China-Vietnam tension and her advocacy for LGBTQ rights, and her brave voices in a lot of politically sensitive issues in Vietnam. So meeting someone, she can quickly sense that this person is suffering from something, and she has a way to get them to tell their stories and tell those stories to the public.
Điều mong muốn lớn nhất của tôi là nâng con người lên. Tôi hay nói đùa với chính mình. Tôi là người dành cả tuổi thanh xuân để đi nâng người khác lên.
And she made it her life mission. She gave up everything for that. And she decided that she would do everything, be it independent newspaper or independent media, independent publishing houses, or blogging, or giving talks to foreign media. She would do everything. And because of that, in October 2020, she was arrested and charged with anti-state propaganda. And the evidence that the prosecutor presented in the documents is that one is some of the books that she wrote. The second, our magazine. The third is that some of the interviews that she gave for BBC Vietnamese, RV Vietnamese, VOA Vietnamese. So those interviews are considered anti-state propaganda. And because of that, she was sentenced to 9 years of imprisonment.
So you mentioned that she's written some books that have been banned, and you actually keep a small collection of banned books here in the office, which you were kind enough to show us some of earlier. Let's take a quick look at that footage.
So this is also one of the most well-known banned books in the country, written by our co-founder, Pham Duan Trang, Politics for Dummies. And in this book, it's really very basic political knowledge for anyone in a normal democracy. It talks about separation of powers, independent judiciary, free and fair elections, how it works in a normal democracy. So, and this is printed in Vietnam illegally by an underground publisher. And
This book sent her to prison.
Exactly. And the one who helped distribute this book in the country also went to jail. And he is now facing about 8 or 9 years imprisonment as well. So the authors and the distributors are all to shelf. This is a book also printed underground by one of the most influential bloggers. So his name is Anh Ba Sam. And then he is the son of the former Vietnamese ambassador to Soviet Union. And he used to be a police officer working for the security forces that protects the regime. But after he retired from the police, he became very popular by running his own blog and trying to deliver independent news to people. And 2014, he went to jail because of that. He served about 5 years in prison, and he was released in 2019. He's now still living in Vietnam. So because of him, a lot of people started to have to rethink about the government.
So, first of all, why do you think it's so important for you to keep a collection of these books for Vietnamese readers?
First of all, our mission is to make knowledge and information accessible to the public. And in order to do that, we have to fight the censorship culture and all the censorship regulations in Vietnam. We cannot store these books in the country, so we store it here in Taipei, in Taiwan, a free country that I so admire and appreciate. Second, these books were written by brilliant minds in our country. Brilliant legal and political scientists living either during the Vietnam War in the South, and their books were burned after the Vietnam War when the communists took over the South. Some brave people managed to save those books for us. And for books that Đoàn Trang has written, I would say she has written these books accepting very high risk. And she went to prison because of that. So I have the responsibility to preserve her books. I cannot let these books disappear in the country. I have to preserve and I have to make it even more accessible to the people. Otherwise, we will forget history and we will forget who we are as a country.
How exactly do Vietnamese readers access these books if they want to read them?
We digitalize all these books, put them online for free for people. So anyone can access these books on our website.
Is there any final message that you'd like to share with our audience, especially those who may be watching in Vietnam?
For people in Vietnam, I always encourage people to keep hope that changes take time and we need to be resilient. It's not as hopeless as a lot of people are talking about. And second, I need to encourage that among citizens, we need to create a culture of listening to understanding. We cannot make any meaningful social changes without working very well with each other, very effectively with each other.
Trịnh Hữu Long, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for having me.
This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. You can find more stories from TaiwanPlus News by following us on social media. Thanks for joining the show. We'll see you next time.